Welcome back to Alberta Primetime and our Wednesday Vocal Point panel on crime. Joining us tonight is youth justice advocate Mark Charrington, defense lawyer Rod Gregory, and in Calgary, Calgary Herald crime reporter Jason Van Rassel. Welcome back to Alberta Primetime, everyone.
Hello. Thank you. Hi.
So the case of Meredith Borowick is winding its way through the legal system. She is the woman charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder in the deaths of 2 babies from 2008 and 2009. She's also facing a charge of attempted murder in connection with the discovery of a newborn in a Calgary dumpster last year. And today, in a separate case, the remains of a newborn baby were found in the Lloydminster landfill. The search began Friday after a woman gave birth and the baby was missing. So, Rod, I'd like to start with you. I know infanticide charges haven't been laid in any of these recent cases, but what is that charge? Can you explain that to us?
Well, it's really a charge that talks about a psychiatric or psychological change in the mother as a result of the childbirth or just prior to the childbirth, and the criminal code recognizes that specific mental condition outside of the regular insanity provisions in the criminal code. Those insanity provisions, I think, go much further in talking about the responsibility of a person's intent when they commit an act, and infanticide really is specific just obviously for a mother. So I think the sections are still relevant, and I know there are those who argue that they're not relevant, but we do have specific things in the criminal code recognizing alcoholism in sentencing and those kinds of things, and I don't think that this section of the code should be removed at all.
Okay. Jason, how common is an infanticide charge in Alberta?
Very rare, and Rod's made a good point in that, this certainly isn't a case where we see this charge laid a lot or even as a disposition at the end of a case. But it is good, I think, for it to be on the books and the courts at least have that flexibility to recognize these kinds of unique circumstances. So the question becomes, how unique is it? I can tell you in Calgary, over the last 20-odd years or so, we've had just over 360 homicides, and really only 7 cases during that time where the case would even have met the criteria stated in the criminal code, which Rod explained, of infanticide. Now, of those, 3 involved a woman named Simi Kalon, who passed away during childbirth in 2009. She was never prosecuted, so we'd never know what would have happened in that case. There was another woman in 1998 who was found not criminally responsible after being charged with murder, and we have 3 cases now currently before the courts where we'll see what happened. In all those cases that remain before the courts, the charge laid was murder. It's been my experience, and I'd be interested in Rod and Mark's perspective on this, that infanticide is rarely a charge that's been laid. What I find is that it's there as a disposition, as an option for the court in terms of a finding of guilt, but not necessarily a charge you see police laying right out of the gate.
And there's been some criticism that this is an outdated charge. Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've worked with 2 clients that have been involved with infanticide, and both of them were very traumatized by the whole aspect of childbirth, as well as just the public shame and the sense of complete utter failure as a mother. And again, it's serious mental health issues, bipolar, suicidal behaviors, and it's quite a rocky road that they travel, and I think that there's some realization that they have to deal with that issue somewhere, and they have a really rough go of it, and it involves a lot of treatment, and I dare say a bit of sympathy. They're not within the normal state of mind when they give birth, and their reactions are very simplistic. There's not a lot of sophistication. They'll just put the baby over a fence or dump it in a landfill or just abandon it under a pile of clothes and try to go on with their lives. And you can sense that there's a real sense of a real troubled mind there when you're dealing with a young lady.
So, Rod, some of the cases that we heard about, the charges were second-degree murder rather than infanticide. Yes. So in what case would that come up? Why second-degree over infanticide?
Well, I think Mark makes a very good point about how the mother, to put it bluntly, disposes of the body of the baby is really doomed for discovery. So if you had an intent to commit murder, you would be far more cunning, if I could use that phrase, in hiding what you've done. And like Mark says, some mothers have just thrown a child over a fence or something that doesn't really display planning and deliberation for that type of charge, which is second degree or first degree murder.
So it's valuable to have that distinguish infanticide
Well,
versus.
it's certainly a factor, and Mark talks about treatment and those kinds of things, and it isn't that a person who is facing this in the criminal justice system can just walk in front of a judge and say, "Oh, I'm subject to the infanticide defense." There's very, very extensive and complex psychiatric evidence that has to come in front of the judge or the jury, and that is presented in front of them. So it's an extremely complicated legal issue.
Well, great. Go ahead.
It just almost seems like, the aspect of general deterrence just doesn't apply with these women. They're very, like they say, it's just a reality of a situation that turns into a nightmare.
All right, we have to take a break now, but more with our Wednesday crime panel in just a moment. Stay with us. We're back with our nightly Vocal Point panel on crime, and now to a prison plea of sorts. Edmonton Mayor Stephen Mandel is asking Ottawa to stop building prison cells in Edmonton because the cost of dealing with ex-inmates is driving up police budgets. The comments came as the Edmonton City Council debated the 2012 police budget. Mandel says the federal and provincial governments don't reimburse cities for covering the extra costs of dealing with justice issues. Currently, Edmonton is home to about 400 paroled inmates, and there are 5 institutions in the area with about 500 prisoners. So, Mark, you were saying some interesting points on this.
Well, I mean, I think the mayor really hit the hammer on the head, is in the sense that we're going to deal with this big flux of inmates coming into the city population. And we only have the 101st Street apartments and independent apartments run by the Edmonton John Howard Society. And that's to handle the current capacity of males. In fact, the federal government just recently cut funding to the Edmonton Elizabeth Fry Society because they had a women's transitional program. So we've diminished resources at the tail end, and we're building them up in jail. Crime. And what we're going to have is we're going to have prisoners being released with a bus ticket dropped off at the LRT. And some of these guys are very violent, and we're putting them in all these negative stressors. And we're going to expect them to reintegrate with society and not make a victim of somebody. It's ridiculous. And I think that the government, I mean, they have had years to look at this, and they've been steamrolling this bill through, and we haven't had time to take a breath and pause and say, well, look what's going to happen. This is a ripple effect. And Mayor Mandel, to his credit, says, whoa, wait a minute. We're the dumping grounds, and we have to work with these people. And they have to integrate within our community, and we have to do it safely. And I think the federal government has really messed this up big time.
So, Rod, valid points here?
Well, I agree, of course, but I think there's a bigger issue too. Not just what Mayor Mandel says. He's saying not in our backyard, but it shouldn't be in anybody else's backyard either. And if we talk about Bill C-10, where if you have 6 marijuana plants, you're in jail for 6 months. As Mark says, we're building up pressure and stress, and as taxpayers, we're paying billions of dollars to incarcerate people, and there's nothing, there aren't programs to stop people from going into jail, and there aren't any programs when they get out. And Gil Kurlakrowski, Obama's drug czar, said, we aren't going to win the drug war by arresting people. And it goes back to what Mark says, and it's all valid.
So, Jason, what could an alternative to Mandel's point be? Do we build more jails in Calgary then?
Well, Rod was talking about not in my backyard, and you know what? We've talked at length on this show about some of the really short-sighted elements of the Tories' tough-on-crime bill, so I'm not out here to give it a blanket defense, but I really do think that there was a really politically motivated and somewhat disingenuous slant to what Mayor Mandel was saying. Just because there are prisons in Edmonton doesn't mean that Edmonton is the dumping ground. It's been my experience that through following dozens and dozens of cases through the correctional system over the years, that prisoners tend to go where their family supports are. And as much as I'd like to claim otherwise, there are a lot of criminals who are from Calgary and end up right back here, whether they've done their time in Edmonton, whether they've done it in Bowden, or whether they've done it at Drumheller. And, you know, the other thing that Mayor Mandel doesn't seem to mention, and neither do any of his cohorts on Edmonton City Council, is that a lot of the costs of monitoring released offenders fall within the federal system, fall on the Parole Board of Canada, fall on probation services working for the provinces. Now, I don't doubt that there is an element of downloading onto the cities, but I just really think that he may have been overstating the case. And to say that Edmonton's bearing a disproportionate load, I don't think there's any real way you can substantiate that either.
Mark.
Well, even if you take that theory, and I agree to some points with what Jason's saying, you're still going to have an influx of Edmontonians, let's say, going to jail. And they're still going to return back to the Edmonton communities, what they call home. And again, we don't have the infrastructure in place. We don't have the halfway houses. We don't have the number of parole officers to increase with this influx. Mm-hmm. So what's going to happen is that the city, which is the catch-all, it provides the housing, it provides the emergency services, it provides, ambulance, fire, city, police services. They're going to be the ones that are going to be responding to all these sort of homeless people or these people that haven't been integrated into our communities. And I think that we're really going to poison the wine in our community with this.
I think it's more than cost too, Rod. Kim Krischel, a city councillor, mentioned that it also could impact the rates of crime.
Maybe. I tend to agree with some of the things, as Jason said, that people go to where they live. So when they're released, they may go to other places. I'm not sure it's going to affect the crime rate significantly, but I think it's the infrastructure that's really critical, and it's completely lacking. And it's the same thing in Calgary. It's not just Edmonton. It's everywhere. So I think Harper's crime bill is affecting all of the cities and not just Edmonton.
So is the solution then going back to the drawing board in terms of the federal decision?
Well, it's not going to happen, though, is it? I mean, it's going to go through the Senate, it's going to get royal assent, and we have to work within the parameters of this crime bill.
So what does that mean for someone in your position?
I think we need to lobby. I think we need to lobby the government that there needs to be some hard funds associated with this crime bill, so we can deal with the tsunami that's going to be hitting us in the next 3 or 4 years.
Rod, any last thoughts here?
Well, I agree. It's going to be a tsunami, and the U.S. has started to recognize that incarcerating everybody is not going to work. So I agree with Mayor Mandel that, hey, we just can't keep doing this. We're turning the clock back 25 years.
Well, some interesting topics, definitely. I appreciate all your insight, gentlemen. Thank you. Mark Charrington is a youth justice advocate. Rod Gregory is a defense lawyer. And Jason Van Rassel is a crime reporter with the Calgary Herald.